today I'll be doing the Draw My Life portion for our novel Kindred, which is written by Octavia E. Butler, and I'll dive right in with the exposition. So we set the scene with Dana, a 28-year-old black woman in 1976. She's married to Kevin, a white man. They actually bonded over their love of writing, and although they're in a really happy relationship, neither of their families approve, unfortunately, because the relationship is interracial. One day, Dana is transported to the antebellum South randomly, and here is where she first encounters Rufus, and at the time, he's actually drowning. So Dana ends up saving him, but to her surprise, Rufus's parents aren't very grateful. Rufus's mother actually strikes Dana, and Rufus's father threatens her with a gun. So before any further harm can be done to her, she's thankfully transported back to present day, but she's only there for a few hours before she ends up making another trip to the South. On this second trip, Rufus is actually a few years older than when she had last seen him, despite the fact that it's only been a few hours since Dana had been there. She's able to learn on this trip who Rufus's father is and what a bad person he is. He's actually a slave owner on the Wayland plantation. Realizing that she's in a white man's house, she uses Rufus's help to locate Alice's house. Alice is a free black child who we later on discover is Dana's ancestor. Dana is unfortunately put in danger when a patroller attempts to rape her right outside of Alice's house, and she transports back. At this point, Dana realizes that she's transported to Rufus when his life is in danger, and she's transported back to her time when her life is threatened.
Dana transports back with Kevin to the plantation, only to see Rufus with a broken leg. This is also when we get a first glimpse of Rufus's racism when he says the N-word, and the turning of Kevin and Dana's relationship when he agrees to be her slave owner. We soon meet Rufus's batshit crazy mother, Margaret, and his cruel father, Tom, who has it out for Dana. This is also the part where Dana decides to stay for Rufus and teach him to be a better man. But soon enough, she gets sent back after being whipped for teaching Nigel, a slave, how to read. But the catch is, she comes back without Kevin. The next time Dana transports back, she comes to a scene where Alice's husband, Isaac, and Rufus are fighting, and Rufus is losing. Alice and Isaac get away, but sadly, Alice is brought back. Rufus is in love with Alice, but she doesn't feel the same way, so he takes her in as a non-consensual lover. In the midst of all this, Dana is trying to search for Kevin, and Rufus agrees to help her by sending the letters that she writes for him. But we soon enough find out that Rufus doesn't send any of these letters. So, lost and literally beaten, Dana is hopeless. But soon enough, our knight in shining armor, Kevin, comes to save her. They have this very cute reunion moment, but obviously is very sadly ruined by Rufus threatening to kill them. But soon enough, they transport back together.
This is where Kevin and Dana are able to recoup and understand what happened to them, but Kevin is having a hard time, rightfully so, assimilating back into the current world. Later, Dana transports back and finds Rufus drunk and Tom on his deathbed. She tries to nurse the both of them back to health, but is unable to do so with Tom. Rufus blames her for his father's death and forces her into the field where she faints from fatigue and abuse from the plantation overseer. Are we seeing a pattern here yet? On the surface, Alice and Dana have a tumultuous relationship throughout the book, but Butler uses the mirror dynamics to portray how similar they are. Alice often gets mad at Dana because of how she gets treated by Rufus, while, on the other hand, Alice gets raped. Dana says that she's going to help Alice run away, but then the devil's mother Margaret comes back. We also get a monumental moment with Carrie about Dana's blackness, addressing her internal conflict about not feeling black enough. Also, Alice has kids now. 2 of them die because of sickness, and her youngest, Jo, is the only one left to survive. They all look a lot like Rufus, light skin, red hair, until Hagar, who was born after Tom, dies. Dana was anxious for Hagar's birth, because Hagar is responsible for carrying their bloodline and eventually Dana's existence. Rufus sells off some slaves, including Tess, his father's former consort. He also sells Sam, a field hand, as punishment for flirting with Dana. When Dana tries to interfere, Rufus hits her. She slits her wrist in an effort to time travel home and is successful.
After being home for 15 days, Dana comes back to the house and finds out that Alice tried to run away again and Rufus sold her kids to get back at her. As a result, Alice killed herself because she could not stand to be separated from her kids. In reality, Rufus had only sent his children upstate, but once they returned, following their mother's death, Rufus officially frees them, thanks to Dana's convincing argument. He also keeps Dana at his side almost constantly. One day, he tells her that she is so like Alice he cannot stand it. He catches her by the wrists, but Dana struggles free. She goes to the attic, planning to cut her wrists in order to get home, but Rufus follows her and attempts to rape her. Dana stabs him twice with her knife, killing him, finally. While traveling back to her own time, Dana's arm gets cut off as a result of Rufus clutching onto her hand. After healing from her amputation, Dana goes with Kevin to the East Coast to see where they had spent so many months of their life. The house was gone, and she couldn't find his grave, but there was a newspaper article saying that Rufus died in a house fire officially. She believes that Nigel started it to cover her tracks. And in the end, they couldn't do anything to change the past, but they went back to see solid proof that these people existed, so they knew they were sane.
Let's get into the plot debrief for Kindred.
Exposition! So for the exposition, we basically consider the beginning of the story when Dana moves in with Kevin and she saves Rufus with her time traveling, and up to her second visit when she sees Rufus with the burning the burning curtains to be the exposition.
Rising action!
We consider the rising action to be the development of Rufus and Alice's relationship, and also Dana's repeated time travels.
Climax!
We consider the climax to be when Alice hangs herself and Dana kills Rufus.
Falling action!
We consider the falling action to be when Dana and Kevin go back to Maryland to uncover the secrets of what happened after Dana killed Rufus.
Resolution!
We consider the resolution to really be the last two paragraphs of the book, where Kevin and Dana realize that they can't do anything about the past and what has happened to them, but they know that it was real and they can only move forward from here.
Conflict!
The overall conflict of the book rooted in Dana's and Rufus's interesting relationship and dynamic. Additionally, we see Dana deal with the issue of her not thinking that she's black enough due to comments and how she's treated by the other slaves in antebellum South.
Character time!
I'm going to be talking about Dana. So Dana is a very complex character with a lot of great qualities. She's smart, bold, resourceful, and she really learns what slavery is like throughout the book. And I think that Butler wrote the book to combat the ignorance and uneducation on what a lot of people in the modern day think of what slavery is. One really admirable quality is that she really stays true to who she is, even with Rufus's threats of enslavement. And I think that she also recognizes privilege, which is one, I guess, admirable but not admirable quality of hers is that how she vows to stay with Rufus and fix him. I don't know about that, but I think that she really has a lot of hope in her heart to make Rufus a better person.
Okay, so today I'll be having the pleasure of analyzing Rufus's character. So I think it'd be safe to say that we saw the most character development in Rufus out of all the characters in this book. Unfortunately, his character development wasn't exactly positive. So in regards to his attitude towards Dana, in the beginning he has a really innocent connection with her since their second trip, when he refuses to let go of her when he breaks his leg. But unfortunately, as time goes on, he not only gets more manipulative and possessive with Dana, but also with Alice, and unfortunately that's what drives him to have such a toxic connection with Dana, and that's eventually why she kills him. okay? And not only is his attitude towards Dana negative, but like his attitude towards slaves and black people also like just declines. It goes on a downward spiral, to be honest.
No.
So since Dana's second trip, she tries to get Rufus to change his mindset, to not be so toxic, racist, discriminatory, but unfortunately her attempts aren't successful. Towards the end of the novel, we can actually see that he not only takes on his dad's mindset, but it even gets worse.
I think it's so upsetting to see his relationship with Alice and like how like he like just like takes control of her. And I think that like in general, any like relationship that is between like a slave and like a captor and a slaver and like a slave is like unconsensual no matter what it is.
Yes.
Especially if you're in a place of power.
Stockholm syndrome.
Literally.
Yeah.
Now I will have the pleasure of analyzing Kevin. What to say? He's an interesting character. He's Dana's husband and he's a white male. So obviously these time traveling trips, he has a lot more freedom and privilege compared to Dana. He does actually use that as a benefit to society when he helps slaves escape in his 5-year entrapment in the antebellum South. However, there are a lot of times throughout the book where Kevin, as a white man, he can't fully understand what Dana goes through as a black female, especially when she time travels back and is stuck under Rufus's thumb. So even though he does his best to understand, there's a lot of times in the book where Dana explains something to him that is clearly wrong and he kind of just shrugs and says, well, you know, we can't do anything about it.
And now I'll be talking about Tom Whalen.
R.I.P.
So Tom is your classic Southern slave owner. He's the father of Rufus. So they look a lot alike, according to Dana. So Tom is this cruel, ruthless, and self-serving character, but he's also has like a more softer side, which you can also see in Rufus's character development. Something like more human about Tom that you wouldn't necessarily see in a slave owner, especially being described from the point of view of a black woman. So his terrible actions as a common slave owner include like brutal punishments and like for minuscule actions and infractions. His behavior towards his son is also common of a Southern man in the 1800s. He's really distant. However, his soft side can be seen in how he is a man of his word, and it's often that Rufus says that Tom is a fair man, even though he is very classic of like a slave owner where he's very like heavy. He's very authoritative and disciplinary, and so his softer side can be seen in like the way he gives gifts to his slaves when they bear children, which is obviously something you want from as a slave owner from your slaves. But he has this like kinder side when he does it. Okay, so now I'll also be talking about Alice.
Lover. Icon.
So before Alice became the core focus of Rufus's life when he was about 16 or 17, she was this really sweet and innocent girl. She was protected by her mother. They lived in a cabin outside of the Wayland plantation, so they were all freed they were all free people. However, she was bought by Rufus after escaping with her husband Isaac. They were caught and she ended up getting beaten almost to death, and so Rufus bought her in order to save her. At least that's what he says. So after she finished healing from her wounds, she turned hard and more independent. So her behavior switched from living to surviving. So the switch from survival mode can be seen in her love and protectiveness over her children. She's very like possessive over her children, really wants the best for them. Overall, Alice was a living girl who turned into a surviving woman who eventually was enslaved in the end.
Now here are some quotes that we found significant.
Rating 4 out of 5 stars! Okay, so we give Kindred a 4 out of 5 stars because the story dragged a lot. The middle felt like filler, if you will.
Yeah, and because the story dragged out so much, the ending felt rushed, so we didn't get like the satisfactory resolution that we were hoping for.
However, on the flip side, it was a really easy read and it was easy to get into the book considering how Octavia structured the plotline.
Yet also the climax is really good and the character development was really well thought out.